Thank you all for joining us in this series of talks promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Today, I'm so very happy to be here and host this talk by our special guests, Leonardo, Leo, and Eduardo Haddad, who will be discussing happy new thinking. Before we turn it over to them, let's do our opening prayer. So I invite all of us to perhaps close our eyes. Let's at the same time open our hearts, open our minds, and be open to all the spirits of light who are here with us today, along with our benefactors who guide us during our journey on earth. May all of us be blessed. May our dear friends, Leo and Eduardo, receive inspiration during their talk, and may all of us be touched by their thoughts. So be it. Eduardo, Leo, welcome. Hope you're doing well. It is so great to have you here to talk about such an interesting topic. So we're here to talk about thinking, new thinking, and happy new thinking. So I'm really eager to hear from you. It is a beautiful Saturday morning. I hope everybody is safe and healthy. And before we proceed and hear your message, let me introduce both of them more formally. Is that okay? So Leonardo Haddad is an undergraduate student at the University of California in Irvine. Leo pursues a degree in psychology and philosophy. Leo is a Spiritist youth educator at the Sunrise Spiritist Society of Texas, and his focus is to integrate the teachings of Spiritism in relevant subjects. Eduardo Haddad is one of the founders and currently a board member of the Sunrise Spiritist Society of Texas in Houston. Eduardo is very active in the Spiritist movement. Mr. Haddad was a treasurer of the Spiritist Federation of Florida and the U.S. Spiritist Federation. Thank you for your service, for your work. Professionally, Eduardo occupies an executive finance position in the technology industry. I would like to remind everyone in the audience to please send your questions. As you hear the topics, we'll collect them. We have allowed time for both Eduardo and Leo to address your questions after their presentation. And so the way we're going to do this today is Eduardo will speak for about 20, 25 minutes. Leo will then follow with another 20, 25, up to 30 minutes. And after that, we'll be open for questions. I appreciate that. And Eduardo, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marcia. First of all, let me thank the United States Spiritist Federation for this opportunity to be working together. We've been partners for a long time, as Marcia said. It's been a pleasure to contribute, to be a part of this big family, and it is certainly a joyous moment. It's a historic day for me, and I hope for my son as well, because it's the first time we are working together, right, on a presentation. And again, obviously, as a father, it's a very proud moment. As a spiritist, it's a very humbling moment to be able to do this together. So if nothing else happens after my talk here, it will already have been well worth it, because again, it's a moment of joy. So the proposal today, right, and that we are doing a little bit of a play on words with Happy New Thinking, because it's the beginning of the year. So Happy New Year. Is to invite us to understand a little bit more about how we think, the quality of our thoughts, and the power of our thoughts, what they do to us, and what they do to the world that we live in. And our humble proposal today is to bring subsidies from the Spiritist doctrine, as well as the scientific and philosophical realms, so that we can hopefully build a bridge between what all the enlightenment that Spiritism has brought to us, and how does that basically correlate to things that we hear and read and study every day. So let me share a few things with all of you. So just bear with me. I hope everyone can see my presentation. Okay. So why happy thoughts? We hear a lot about this, right? We hear a lot about people saying, hey, you have to have happy thoughts, you have to have positive thoughts, the power of positive thinking. Why, right? Why happy thoughts, right? We are really not talking about just silly, blind happiness, right? What we really want to talk about is the quality of our thoughts, positive or negative, but obviously looking at the effects of higher ideals on what that does to us and to the world we live in. So the first question is, does that matter? What can it do? And today, again, we are going to postulate that the quality of our thoughts can make us, if anything, as a minimum, it affects our health. It does also affect our lives. And again, we're going to be as bold as to postulate that it can and has changed the world. But how, and in doing that, just a reminder that obviously our actions and our words are the ones that change the world. But those actions are normally preceded by our thoughts. Therefore, understanding our thought process, has a key role in understanding how things change as a result. But do we really know the quality of what we think? And I've been pondering about it, and I've done, I'm not a scientist in this area by no means, but I was curious about it, and I went on to research, and I found something that's been published by the National Science Foundation. I don't know if it's really trustworthy or not, but I found it very interesting as a thought experiment, right? To tease out and to be used as a tool for us to stop and think about the quality of what we think. Now, someone with a lot of time in their hands has determined that the average person has 50,000 thoughts a day. Again, don't hold me to this fact. I cannot prove it. I'm not sure how you count the number of thoughts you have in a day. But again, I think it's an interesting theoretical experiment, at least. So bear with me for a moment here. And if we all consider that, let's say the average person has 50,000 thoughts per day, this publication, this research paper, basically segregated or compartmentalized the thoughts in this way, which are very interesting. So it says that 40% of what we think in a day is related to worries that will never happen. Now, that's very interesting. And also think about your own thoughts. And I was thinking about it, and is that real? I mean, almost 50% of what I think are worries that probably will never happen. So that means we are, borderline paranoid, which some of us are. But I was thinking, I mean, and so please be honest at this point. Have you ever looked at the sky and a plane was flying, and did you never thought about, hey, what happens if this plane falls from the sky right now? Right? I guess all of us have had this type of crazy thoughts once in a while, which kind of illustrates that we tend to worry about things that will never happen or we have no control of, which, may be driven by our instincts, which is, coming from the laws of nature to protect us, but in excess can be very damaging, can lead to anxiety. They can lead to, again, paranoia. 30% are things that have already happened. So think about this. How many of us live in the past? How many of us hang on to things that happen that causes us to feel guilt, causes us to feel anger, causes us to feel sadness. Very seldom they cause us to feel happiness, and I hope that will be the case. But again, we are always reminded not to live in the past. But look at this, interesting. If this is real, 30% of our thoughts about things that already happened, we cannot change the past. We can always make a new future. So is that helping us? Is that helping with causing the effects that we want in our bodies, in our health, in the world we live in? 12% are related to our health. So none of these statistics here, they excluded health. So health alone, accounts for 12%. And obviously, in this day and age with COVID, obviously this number is probably a lot higher than this. This was done a few years ago. So I mean, this relationship is probably different. But again, and understandably, now today our thoughts are dominated by our health. But even when things were normal, and God willing, they will go back to normal, we still worry about our health, which again, there's a positive side to it because we need to take care of ourselves. But too much becomes an obsession, becomes anxiety, and can become, other things which are not good. And 10% are related to other unimportant things, right? I'm checking my, my Facebook feed or things that, are distractions, and that, it doesn't mean they are bad. It just means that they have no practical implications for what I'm doing that day. And according to the study, only 8% are relevant, are things that are helping me move forward, accomplish my goals, truly take care of myself and the others around me, that I'm investing in myself, in my career, in my studies, etc. Again, I wouldn't trust these numbers too much, but I think it's a good way for us to be truly asking, do we really know the quality of our thoughts? And why is this important is we've been reminded, and thankfully now there's so much literature and so many reliable research publications that build a very strong link between the quality of our thinking and health. So I'm going to just highlight a few things because we don't want to deep dive too much into this, but we want to remind ourselves how much of this the elements that we've heard from Spiritism, for example, from the Spiritist doctrine, from the works of Allan Kardec, but also from the works of Chico Xavier, for example, the series André Luiz, right? From André Luiz, who talks a lot, because he was a doctor when he was incarnate, talks a lot about this relationship. But is and some people in the beginning would think that this was something that was limited to the Spiritist, knowledge and community. But in this day and age, a lot of this now is common knowledge. So, for example, the World Health Organization already defines health not just as merely being the absence of disease or infirmity, but really health is a state of complete physical, mental, social, ecological, and spiritual well-being. These are the words of the World Health Organization, not mine. So this concept that our mental, our spiritual well-being is a part of our health is now made its way to mainstream media and science. And of course, if I can borrow just a little passage from Missionaries of the Light from André Luiz, he makes it very clear that there is a very direct correlation between what we think and the physiological impacts to our bodies, which he calls the vase of clay. And he's saying here that in almost all cases, a sick body represents a sick mind, right? Which tells us that the quality of our thoughts has an immediate impact to our bodies. It may not immediately manifest itself as disease or illness, but over time, if that is a continuous negative impact, it will absolutely result in a ill body. And again, that's not André Luiz saying that, it's not Eduardo saying that, or Leonardo. Today, many doctors already have this as a fact, right? A little bit further, now that this has made its way, this topic has made its way through mainstream science and publications, you see many researchers double clicking, right, unpacking this and going to the next level, really understanding how does this mechanism work at a cell level, right, at the most minute detail. And again, I'm borrowing one publication from Dr. Bruce Lipton, who is I think a professor from uh, Stanford. I was going to say Harvard, but Stanford University. And in his book, The Biology of Belief, he will explain. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but he explains how each individual cell is almost a free living entity, right? It's a little entity that has its own life, and each one of the trillions of single cells that we have in our body, they respond to what Dr. Lipton calls the central voice, and in his words, a character we perceive as the mind and spirit. And again, I'm just grossly simplifying here, but he basically says that if the body is well, if our mind is well, the body is relaxed and is growing, is taking care of health. When we get stressed, and again, stress to some degree is a mechanism of protection. So there's nothing bad there. But if it too much stress will lead to telling the cells to stop growing and suspend that growth to protect the body, and that again in a long period of time becomes an illness. Another reference that I invite everyone to examine when you have a chance is there are so many publications, but again, there was one that called my attention from Time magazine in 2009 called How Faith Can Heal. And it brings a lot of interesting evidence about how this concept of well-being from a spiritual perspective can have very positive effects on how people recover, right, from illnesses, for example. Plenty of studies done there. And they state that science and religion argue all the time, and they have for centuries, but now they increasingly agree on one thing, which is a little spirituality can be very, very good for your health. And many hospitals and many doctors already adopt this as a rule. But I would say enough about that aspect, which I think, as I said, now it's well understood, right? It's very refreshing to see how that relationship between spiritual well-being and health has already been established in our common world. It's no longer something that only doctors who believe in spirituality or spiritists possess the knowledge of. It's every day it's becoming more and more mainstream. So let's move from there to start understanding how do our thoughts affect our reality, right? Not just our health, but everything else around us. And we can always go back to our beloved doctrine because there's a wealth of knowledge that Spiritism brings. And if we borrow a couple references, for example, from the Genesis, right? Chapter 14. And also, I'm blending here some concepts from the book Mechanisms of Mediumship, Chapter 4, from Chico Xavier and Waldo Vieira. It will explain in detail this mechanism, right? Which says that our thought, and especially continuous thought, which is hard to achieve because we get distracted very easily, that thought has a quality. That quality can be described by the frequency and intensity, focus that we give to that thought. Frequency means the quality. Is it good? Is it bad? Intensity means how focused can I be on an idea. That which is powered by our will, right? Nothing happens if you don't want it to happen. So it's powered by your will. That permeates and affect the universal fluid. And that causes our thoughts to be condensed, literally condensed. And the Genesis, and again, and Chico Xavier and will explain that the molecules get saturated, and that truly materialize our thoughts. So we see this in Spiritist literature abundantly, that the higher spirits can see who we are. We don't have to say anything. They can see who we are. And one reason they can see who we are is that literally the way we think is materialized in our what we call perispirit. They can see the quality, because that is exactly the materialization of the quality of our thoughts. We are beginning to understand more and more about this. Again, in the real practical world, a lot of people call this, the quality of your aura, right? Or spiritual sphere, or there's different names to it. But more and more non-spiritists but spiritualists, right, consider that there is a way to see, to actually physically see the quality of what's surrounding us. I wanted to bring one very powerful example that has been, I think, probably one of the best documented examples of how the power of thought can actually modify the world we live in. So bear with me for a few minutes here. This was also known as the Maharishi effect, because it's the name of the yogi who created this program. And it's known as the Transcendental Meditation and TMCD program experiment in Washington, D.C., the capital of the U.S., in 1993. So what happens here is this was a formal project that took place during the summer of 1993. And the goal of this program was to prove that thought can have an impact on violence and violent crime. So what I'm going to share with you is the final results of this 2-month prospective experiment that was carried out in Washington. Now, there is plenty of documentation around how this happened. This was not done in the back room or with a kind of a opaque group of people who didn't have who did it hiding from cameras. This was done, first of all, on the basis of previous research, where smaller experiments indicated that if you did this more at scale, you could actually impact violent crime rates in a whole city. And to document this group actually assembled a 27-member independent project review board. So they brought together, again, people who were not part of this meditation group. They brought together sociologists, criminologists from leading universities, representatives from the police department, from the government of DC, and civic leaders who all had access to how the project was going to be conducted, the research protocol. They could question it, they could put conditions on it, and they were part of who monitored the progress to make sure that the data that was being collected was reliable. And again, I'm not going to go into the details, but some of you who enjoy statistics, you may be skeptical and say, well, but are you sure that there weren't other variables that have an effect here? And yes, there were. For example, one strong correlation that had been established before was the correlation between weather and crime. So that was a well-known correlation, the temperature of the day and crime. So this team actually isolated that, and they corrected for that using statistical tools. And then the dependent variable was violent crime, right? By measure through well-established metrics that the law enforcement community accepted, and then they adjusted for the independent variables, right? Which were the other controls. Now, what happened? Here's what happened. So I know I don't want to confuse anyone, But so just follow me or here on the golden line and the green line. So the green line shows how many professional meditators had been brought in to participate in this study. And over 8 weeks, they started with around 600 meditators, and they brought in more and more meditators over time, up to about 4,000 meditators that came to Washington, D.C., and they had a specific program to focus on changing, again, the vibrational pattern of the city. And so they would practice, I think, 2 or 3 times a day during those 8 weeks. And over time, on the golden line, you can see the rate of crime, the reduction in crime. And at the end of the 8 weeks, violent crime, which is considered to be homicides, rapes, and assaults, had dropped almost 25%, which is undoubtedly a material change in the quality of what was happening in DC. Again, I'll invite you to read by yourself. This paper, again, is well established, well known, and an evidence that we can change the world by focusing on good things. Now, how can we do this? How can we create change if the average person, like me and you, loses their concentration every 8 seconds? So we are not, not everyone is a trained meditator. So how can the world improve if we get so distracted? And hey, pay attention, I'm talking here. I know you got distracted for a second there. So so this is what we're going to explore next, right? Is how does this work, and how does Providence, right, the higher spirits, the ones who are in charge of us, how do they help us actually improve our thoughts if we are so limited in our ability to concentrate? We know there is power in thought, but we still don't have the ability to concentrate to that level that we saw happen in Washington, D.C., because we are distracted. Some of us are working on meditation, but again, it's going to be a long journey until we all can get to that point. So in the last few minutes here before I turn to Leo, I'm going to introduce a concept that is known in the Spiritist circles as our vibrational pattern. But how does that work? What is that? So think of the quality or the frequency of your thoughts as an ECG, right? And again, I'm creating a metric here that doesn't exist, right? So let's say that Eduardo has an average thought pattern of 20. Again, it's a number I came up with. It's 20. What does that mean? Well, it means that Eduardo sometimes gets so angry and so upset and so depressed that his vibrational pattern goes down to minus 20, minus 30. And when I'm really, really bad and I turn into the devil myself, right? My vibrational pattern reaches minus 40. Right? That's the lowest it can go when I'm really, really bad, really depressed, really angry, really not someone I want to be. Well, on the contrary, when Eduardo, finds his happy place and he meditates and he prays and he reaches for the higher realms and he's in touch with God and he's in touch with the higher spirits and my mentor, then I can reach, a high of 80. But we know we cannot do that all the time. So we are oscillating throughout the day, throughout the weeks, throughout the year on these ups and downs. But that produces an average of the lowest lows and the highest highs that we can achieve, which is each person's average vibrational pattern. So if you take these individual vibrational patterns that we all produce, each one of us, again, think of yours, I don't give it a number. If we add all of these vibrations that are affecting ourselves, our health, and affecting the world, what Andre Lewis calls this in Evolution in Two Worlds, and is not just produced by the incarnate spirit, it's also produced by the discarnate spirits who are attached to Earth. They call this the spiritual photosphere. If you were fish, this would be the quality of the water that we are in, because we all, clean the water and we poop in the water, right? So, then there's the quality, the over average quality of the water. Now, the photosphere is the environment, is the fluidic environment where our reality materializes, where our health shows up, and it's where the world around us happens. Now, we have a goal, and the goal is to improve that average. So I don't want to stay on the average at 20. I want to raise my average. I want to go to 50. I want my idle state to be 50, 60. What does that mean is that I don't want to get to minus 40 when I get angry. I want to work on myself so that my lowest low is minus 10. So I want to raise my lows from minus 40 to minus 10. So you conquer your limitations to a point where you no longer get so depressed, get so angry, get so negative. Likewise, I want to go up to 100 when I want to reach my mentor, his mentor's mentors, her mentor, and I want to reach Jesus if I can through my thoughts. So that is the goal. And if you do this, you establish a new idle state, and you are raising your vibrational pattern. Now, if we were to wait for each person to work on themselves and to take their own time to do this so that the world could improve, it probably would take a whole lot longer than it has taken. So the question is, how does this happen at scale? And does this happen at scale? And it does. So we know this happens at scale. That means that there is a mechanism that Providence provides that helps us, everybody, on average, get to a higher average vibrational pattern. And this is a blessing that we all have. So that blessing, that mechanism, is what Leo is going to take us through. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to have the pleasure to now turn to Leo to tell us how the magic happens.
Yes, let me just share my screen here real quick. Okay, so
you can hit the hide, the little hide button there. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, okay. So as Eduardo just described, this process does happen at scale, right? Our spiritual photosphere, the quality of our collective thoughts, they do improve, and there is a mechanism, a process by which this happens. And so this process, by the way, is detailed in the Spiritist literature, but we've decided it's a general process that we've decided to condense into 3 points just for, simplification and easier understanding. So Providence, the first step is that, and by the way, when I refer to Providence, I simply mean the higher spirits, God, all of the spirits that are coordinating events and helping us here on Earth through their guidance, because as we know, we have a very strong connection to the spiritual dimension, the spiritual world. And so the first step is that Providence orchestrates the seeding of new and positive ideals as we reach new stages of maturity. And what this means, obviously, is that in order for our spiritual photosphere to improve, there has to be the seeds of these new ideas, these better ideas and ideals that we can strive for. And so those ideas must be sown. And examples of this orchestration and these ideals being sown are the three revelations that we speak of in the Spiritist literature, which are the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the revelation of the Spirit's book, Spiritism. And you might note that in each of these revelations, there were figures that sort of led these revelations, that provided the revelations, which brings us to the second step, which is that thought and spiritual leaders act as beacons that help these ideals spread. Basically, every movement has its leaders. It's the people who have the vision, the elevated spirits who have the capability to spread the ideas, who act as the centers for these revolutionary ideas. And it's through them, because as Eduardo explained, we cannot rely on every single individual to improve in order for the world to improve, because that would just be simply too difficult. It would take too long. So we need these elevated spirits that come along and help us to progress faster. And once these figures disseminate their ideas, then there's the process of embracing these ideas. And once we do that, once we embrace these higher ideals, this causes positive and lasting change, intellectually, materially, and morally. And just an interesting or a quick note on that, there's a really fascinating book by Malcolm Gladwell called The Tipping Point, which examines this process of embracing new ideals. And he has the concept of the tipping point, which is basically the number of people needed to embrace an idea. And then after that, there's sort of an exponential embracing of the idea by everyone else. And so this process of a few visionaries, a few people, a few leaders, sowing this idea and then disseminating it, and then the expansion of that idea and the adoption of that idea by others has been documented to some degree at least. And so just thought that was an interesting note. And an example of higher ideals and movements that strive to inoculate these higher ideals in us is Spiritism, because there's this from the Gospel according to Spiritism, there are the two fundamental injunctions of Spiritism, which is to love one another and to educate ourselves. And it's these two ideals which are basically at the foundation of everything else in Spiritism. So I'd like to turn the focus a little bit and examine one specific movement, which is a perfect example of this progress at scale that we've just discussed. And I will refer to this movement specifically because it was the precursor to Spiritism, in that without this movement, the ideals of Spiritism probably wouldn't be embraced. And this isn't just my opinion, by the way, because I'm going to be reading an excerpt which talks about this movement. So, how Providence orchestrates our new wave of development through new ideals. So it's this new wave that I'm referring to is the movement that preceded Spiritism. So this excerpt is from On the Way to the Light, and it is written by Francisco Candido Xavier and through the Spirit Emmanuel. So this is obviously the words of Emmanuel. So he says, the 18th century began with equally renewing struggles, but high-order spirits of philosophy and science, who reincarnated chiefly in France, would fight against the errors of society and politics, upending the principles of divine right, in whose name all sorts of barbarities were being committed. Amongst this plethora of reformers were the venerable figures of Voltaire, Montesquieu, Rousseau, D'Alembert, Diderot, and Quesnay. Their benevolent teachings reverberated in the future United States and throughout the rest of the world. So this movement that Emmanuel is referring to here, we know as the Enlightenment. These figures, Voltaire, Montesquieu, Rousseau, etc., these are all Enlightenment or the Age of Enlightenment figures. just a brief overview of what the Enlightenment was. It was an intellectual and also moral and political movement which took place. The dates are generally, the start is generally accepted to be around the late 1600s, and then the end is basically the French Revolution, 1789. And as many historians note, and as most people or many people know, this was a period of basically another intellectual renaissance. It was preceded by the scientific revolution, and then out of the scientific revolution came the Enlightenment, and so that means that the ideas that were disseminated during the Enlightenment have a lot to do with reason, and it is on the side of intellectual progress, because as we know, there's two facets to progress: intellectual and moral. So the Enlightenment dealt with both of these facets. It dealt with scientific progress, intellectual progress, trusting reason, trusting empiricism. So basically, we can understand the world through our senses and through our intellect. And on the moral side, as Emmanuel says here, it combated divine right, which was basically the idea that kings can rule because basically God gave them the right to rule. And so you can see how challenging that idea produced progress. It produced or it advanced the idea of equality. And so on the moral side, the Enlightenment dealt with political, all of the political problems of the time, and that persists today. Inequality, just a lot of moral problems, and one of the biggest ones was also the domination of the church, because they believed that the church was suppressing free speech, was suppressing free thought, and so criticism of the church was also a big part of the Enlightenment. And so, as just to revisit the last sentence here, their benevolent teachings reverberated in the future United States and throughout the rest of the world. So Emmanuel here is saying that the Enlightenment had a profound impact on the world. And I noted that the ideals of Spiritism, the Enlightenment basically paved the way for them. And so if the Enlightenment was in fact a new wave of development in the seeding of new ideals, what effects has it had on the world? And here's where I'd like to bring in some empirical data, because it's very fascinating, and it's truly a blessing that we have the ability to measure progress. We have these brilliant scientists and individuals who are truly committed to testing out these ideas. Did the Enlightenment actually produce positive effects? And one of these figures is Steven Pinker. And I will be sort of going over his book, Enlightenment Now. So I'm going to first give a brief introduction of him and his book, and then we'll move on from there. So Stephen Arthur Pinker is a Canadian-American cognitive psychologist, linguist, popular science author, and Johnstone Family Professor in the Department of Psychology at Harvard University. So he is a professor at Harvard, very notable figure. He's done much research. He's a well-published author. And Pinker's 2018 book, Enlightenment Now, seeks to demonstrate that regarding virtually every metric of progress, the world has improved, and he believes the root of such improvement is found in the Enlightenment. And so we can see here that his ideas align, they correlate very well with what Emmanuel teaches us, with what Spiritism tells us. And I think that's really important, that we have these people who aren't, he's not too, Steven Pinker isn't too concerned with spirituality, in a sense. He's not concerned with, not that he's not a spiritual person, but he's just not concerned with the religious aspect. He is only concerned with the brute empirical facts. And so whenever the spiritual ideas, the philosophy lines up with the empirical fact, I think that makes a very powerful argument. And so I'm going to be introducing here, his book, by the way, contains about 70 or so figures, charts, and graphs that plot this progress in many different domains, in many different in many ways, all the progress that occurs. There are many figures, and I've decided to sample a few of those today. So, is the world improving? So these are directly from his book. So the first one on the left here, the first graph shows life expectancy. And we see that life expectancy at birth has improved. And by the way, it starts at the year 1701 all the way through 2013. And then on the y-axis here, we have the age, the life expectancy. So we can see in 1701, life expectancy at birth was a bit over 35 years. And this is at birth, by the way, meaning that it's not taking into account child mortality, which was also extremely high. And he has a graph that demonstrates that. But even at birth, once the newborn, is born, then even given that, the life expectancy is still extremely low. And then we see here tremendous progress made. The slope of the line is pretty evident, and it's the same. Those other lines represent life expectancy for a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, all the way up to a 70-year-old, and all of these lines obviously have a positive slope. The second graph here is available calories, meaning how many calories were available to each individual. So this is sort of a figure on nutrition. And we see here in 1700 that we have the main three lines here, the longest and the center lines here are the developed world, basically. So England, United States, and France, and then those other smaller plotted lines on the right are the world, India, and China. And we see that even in the developed world, obviously tremendous progress has been made, but the progress has been even more drastic in the rest of the world, because as we know, the countries like China and India have had problems with malnutrition and things of the sort. Not that other countries haven't, but theirs has been severe. Many countries around the world, obviously in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, also very low. They've had a lot of problems with this, but we see that the line for the whole world has also increased dramatically. And it's important to note here that while this figure may not be the most impactful, although it certainly is, it's also important to keep in mind that while the calories intake per person is increasing, so is the population. And many scientists feared that with increasing population would come food shortage, and the opposite happened. Population increased as well as availability of food. So that is an incredible feat of human progress. The third chart here is extreme poverty. And so starting in 1820 all the way to 2020, and the y-axis here is what percentage of the world was in extreme poverty. And in this specific chart, the definition of extreme poverty is measured by $1.90, so $1.90 per day in 2015 US dollars. So that means that in 1820 here, we can see that about 90% of the world's population was living at basically $1.90 a day. So 90% of the world was in extreme poverty, and we see how tremendous the progress is. By 2020, it looks like about 10% of the world. So and these are facts that we don't hear often. We always hear about the problems of the world, but little do people know of just how many people have been lifted from extreme poverty, and this trend continues to this day. Here's three more graphs. On the left is homicide, and measured by homicides per 100,000. And in every single country, basically, the homicide rate has plummeted since, and this starts in the year 1300 all the way to 2000. The second graph on the screen, social change. This was a measure of basically people's racist, sexist, homophobic opinions between 1987 and 2012. And then the three lines that are plotted are questions of whether you agree or disagree. So do you agree women should return to their traditional roles in society? The answer has gone from basically 50% of people believe that in 1985 to now it's looking like 30 in 2015. And then agrees school boards ought to have the right to fire teachers who are known homosexuals. That is also decreased. And disagree. I think it's all right for blacks and whites to date each other. And so people do not disagree with that nearly as much as they used to. The last chart here is sustainability. It's something that people are worried about, right? Like CO2 emissions, pollution, things of that nature. And it's interesting that as oh, and this is in the US, by the way, but other countries also mirror these patterns. And we know that because a lot of research has been done demonstrating that when GDP increases, people's tendency to want to protect the environment, to begin worrying about the environment, increases as well. So when a poor country begins to gain in terms of GDP, then they become more worried about the environment, which is a fantastic thing. And in the US, we've driven more miles. Like there are more people drive nowadays. More miles are driven in the US. But while more miles are being driven, CO2 emissions are actually decreasing because almost every year we have new technology, we have new regulations and different things that are bringing down emissions. As we know today, that is a large focus is sustainability, and it's certainly paying off. And here's a really fascinating figure that I found in the book, which is the tone of the news. And what this means is whether or not the news, like whether the news reports have a positive or negative connotation, basically. And how they measured this was by sort of tallying up how many words in the articles of the news had positive connotations and how many words had negative. So the word like good, terrific, things like that, and then like bad, tragic, obviously, like words of that nature. And we see that since 1945, but more recently since like 1960, between 1960 and 65, there's a tremendous decrease in the tone of the news, meaning that the reports are getting gloomier and more negative. And I think that this is, and this is also Pinker's argument, that it's for this reason that we often overlook all of the progress that the world has made, because if the news is reporting is reporting more negatively, then we are inclined to believe that progress has not been made, that things are worse. How many times do you hear that? Oh, things used to be so much better. But this is a fallacy that comes from journalism that's well documented. So here's a conclusion of the things that me and Eduardo have spoken of. So each of us produces our own fluidic vibration which is determined by the quality of our thoughts and feelings. Collectively, our fluidic vibrations make up the spiritual photosphere, which determines the overall level of evolution of our world. And under the guidance of Providence, and through the cooperation and effort of spirits who are aiming for the good, including you and I, we individually and collectively improve ourselves and the world. So we all have a part to play in the improvement of our spiritual photosphere, right? Which is the collective, our collective vibrations. And we see that there are these grand movements that take place that are orchestrated by Providence, but also we see the individual at the individual level in our own lives, progress, and we see the importance of improving our vibrational patterns. And so I find it really fascinating and just beautiful how these progress works at multiple levels, and how we see the different levels working together. So yeah, I think that is the end of my portion of the presentation. Happy thinking in 2021, and I'm gonna hand it back to Eduardo.
Yep. Thank you, Leo. So back to so I think we can pause here for questions. I see a number of questions, Marcia, on the chat. I don't know if you want to facilitate. Do you want me to?
We'll do that. Thank you, Eduardo. So first of all, thank you both you, Eduardo and Leo. Thank everyone who watched this live talk, and those who have been following us weekly. Please note, next Saturday, January 16th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, please don't miss Anísio Rezem, who will be speaking about, let's talk about the gospel. But Eduardo, Leo, we're going to, before we close, right, we're going to go over some questions. And I just want to say, such a great enlightening discussion. I appreciate you bringing so much data, so much information, and really not only to explain about our thought quality, how it matters, right, but how science and spirituality and spiritism specifically are really converging. So it is almost 12 p.m. We're open for comments. We're open for questions for the audience. So the first one that we see is for you, Eduardo. Can you please discuss a little bit how Spiritism views the difference between moral and intellectual progress?
Thank you, Marcia, very much again for the opportunity. Thanks for the question. And you know, I'll be a little provocative in my answers. We are all brothers and sisters in this journey, but I think something we need to do is always question, right? If we are truly embracing the ideals that Spiritism has brought to us, right? And as Leo showed us, I mean, this is a massive work that the Providence orchestrates. Right? And if you read On the Way to the Light, and Emmanuel explains step by step everything that Jesus and the higher spirits have continuously done, even though we failed and we keep failing, they never give up on us. It's almost like they are always coming up with a new plan, right? We failed in the Middle East, let's go to Europe. We failed in Europe, let's go to the Americas. If failed in the Americas, we're going to go somewhere else, and we're going to bring new people, we're going to bring new ideas, and they never, ever give up on us. The question is, are we truly embracing those ideas? And again, the part of being provocative, I think we Spiritists, we are very selective. We choose the parts of Spiritism that are convenient for us to adopt, and we somehow forget or gloss over some of the fundamental things that are written right there. And the spirits are kind enough to come back and remind us over and over. Now, to that question, and this is a pet peeve of mine, is there is an overabundance of focus on we need to develop morally, which is true. It's absolutely true. But somehow we develop an allergic reaction to intellectual development. Right? So the moral development should not implicate that you need to basically forget about the intellectual development. So I'm going to refer back to the basics of Spiritism. Question 23 of the Spirit's book. Kardec asks, what is the spirit? And the answer is the intelligent principle of the universe. The spirits didn't say it's the moral principle of the universe. They were very clear. It's the intelligent principle of the universe. So there's nothing wrong, absolutely on the contrary, for us to develop first intellectually. And this is well described in questions 780, parts A and B. I'm not going to read them, but in question 780, Kardec says, so is it normal for the intellectual progress to happen first? And the Spirit said, not only is normal, that is how it should happen. Because by developing intellectually, we then learn how to distinguish between good and bad, and then start making moral decisions. So I want to bring that back because, again, I think we tend to neglect the importance of educate yourselves. The imperatives that the Spirit of Truth gave us in the gospel is spiritists, love one another and educate yourselves. And we get confused. We do need to educate ourselves, understanding what science brings and reality, and cutting through what the media tells us, which is it's sometimes different than the actual facts, is very important, so that we understand, is the world truly improving? The data makes it absolutely clear. Undoubtedly, the world has improved and continues to improve. Now, are we loving one another, right? So I'm going to end by saying, no, we are not. We have a lot of work to do. And I'm going to invite my Spiritist brothers and sisters to take a moment to pause and think about it, because we tend to hold ourselves to a higher standard than the rest of the population. And I, for one, would love to see more demonstrations of camaraderie, of partnership, of friendship, of love within the Spiritist movement before we start telling other people how they should be living their lives.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eduardo. It's very, very insightful answer to that. Do we have another question? Yes, we do. Sylvia, thank you so much. Sylvia Morrow, she asked, how can our thoughts help planet Earth and its inhabitants to the regeneration phase?
Yeah, if I may, and Leo, feel free to chime in, of course. I'll get the ball rolling. So as we see, right, there is this pull and push in the way our thoughts work. Right, the push is each person individually working to better themselves so that we raise our vibrational patterns, right? But there is the pull, which is the very, very humbling, benevolent work that the higher spirits do to continue to see the ideals for us to embrace. They continue, right? We are very distracted, and once in a while, the benevolent spirits come to us and they shine spotlight, right? Oh, it's shining, and then we pay attention so that we can focus. And those are the ideals that we keep being reminded of. Spiritism bringing a lot of those ideas to us. So we can always do two things, right? One, and what I can do here. I know. Let me, if I may, just remind ourselves of the multitude of things that we can do to within Spiritism and outside of Spiritism, right? To improve the world. To Sylvia's point, there's so much we can do, and given that we decide to do that, we put our willpower to work, and that is another big challenge for us. Again, right? We are learning more and more about the watch and pray, right? So how do we meditate, visualize? How do we pray? And the power of doing that, and the power of practicing that. So we can do this. We do individually. A lot of centers like ours have been doing prayers in group, right? So that we also irradiate those ideals and benefits. But we do more than that, right? We study. Again, we need to educate ourselves, right? And many spirit centers offer very good courses, classes. I mean, we have an abundance of really good literature in Spiritism, and that feeds our soul. And that helps us with that process of improving the average vibrational pattern, because we are always feeding good things, and by that definition, we are feeding back to the world, better quality vibrations, and that is improving the photosphere. But do good. There's nothing better than actually act. We talk a lot, and we oftentimes neglect to act. There's some criticism on Spiritism and Spiritists that we are too passive. I've heard that all my life. I've been a Spiritist for 40 years or more. I'm 51. and that we tend to be passive, that we don't that we neglect things, we let things happen because we believe that some magical law of justice will take care of it, when we are ourselves the instruments of that law. So if we don't act, there's no magic, nothing's going to happen. So a lot of things happening in the world right now. Ask yourself, have I done anything right now? Have I contacted my representatives, right, in the Senate, in Congress, to express what I think should be done? Have you? I pay taxes. I pay a lot of taxes, and I do that. I will write often to my representatives to demand that certain things happen. And I don't know if anyone on the audience has done that. They will answer you. If you send them an email, they will reply to you. And so try doing that. Try voicing your demands that certain things should happen, for example, and do good. Join a cause. Again, how many of us have taken time to truly join a cause? Some have, many have, and I have to acknowledge that. And it's a beautiful thing to see. So let this be an inspiration for people to, we are beginning the year, make a resolution, say, I'm gonna do good, I'm gonna do better. See the good in others. That's, again, Spiritists, love one another, right? We do need to start practicing for real what we read and what we preach, and spread the word. I would say that's one big thing, and I think it is in the doctrine. I think maybe in the gospel, that one big charity, right? One big piece of being charitable is to spread the gospel, is to spread the word. I hope that helps.
Thank you. That was very, very, very good, and tied in with a lot of what Leo mentioned, right? With Pinker and other of Gladwell and other speakers. So thank you so much. Let me see if we have a time. Yes, we do. So Yasko, hi, how are you? Yasko mentioned to us enlightenment, intellectual and scientific development in the 18th century preceded Kardec and Spiritist codification. How these waves of human progress shaped our current moral and spiritual development. Through my narrow window, it seems to me very slow and back and forth path. Can you talk more about it? Either
Leo?
you, Eduardo, or Leo?
Yeah, sure. I'll
Thank you.
to this question. So I would certainly agree that, and this is something Pinker talks about, is that progress is, I think his quote is that progress does not mean that everything is getting better everywhere all the time. And by this, he means that just because you see something that doesn't look like progress doesn't mean that that demonstrates a trend moving backwards. So I certainly agree that there's progress does seem slow, and there are back and forth pulls. Like, for example, terrible things have happened since the Enlightenment and since the birth of Spiritism. Both world wars happened after it. And so I've found myself questioning, like, have we is this an indication that progress is an illusion? But I don't think it is, because first of all, like just for the example of the wars, and this is why it's so important to understand and to have the facts backing your arguments. Like, for example, the amount of wars that we had previously was tremendous at a much higher rate. The only reason these wars were so terrible was because we had improved intellectually. And so, to tie this in a little bit with the last answer, or I believe that the first answer to the first question, is that intellectual improvement does come first, but we also see its negative effects when we haven't improved morally, because then our wars are even more drastic. But just a general answer to the development of these ideas, and whether or not we have seen progress. I think that if you do track the ideas, they are still, even when we begin to stray from them, because I think the negative things that we see is when we begin to stray from these ideas. So they are there, and I think that often we just need to remind ourselves of them. And as Eduardo says, the Providence continues to seed these ideas, and so they are there. They've been introduced to a tremendous degree. Like I think it's completely wrong to think that what happens is just, oh, we have to keep being reminded of it, and then we forget, and then we have to keep being reminded. The standard has improved, and it's improved measurably. And so while things look bleak often, I think that if you do track the progress empirically and intellectually as well, the standard has improved. It isn't just a back and forth of progress, no progress. People's individual standards are much higher now. And so I know it seems like we go back sometimes, but I think the general trend is a positive one. And if you look at the graphs, going back to the 1700s, as I've shown, there's just no question. They certainly have improved in every single way, basically. Not every single way. Pinker, he admits this himself, that that there are a few, and it's only a few trends that show either slow progress or almost no progress, but almost nothing has gone backwards, which is another good indicator.
Very good. Thank you so much, Leo. I appreciate your answer. We have from Glaucio Pessoa. He asks how to keep the constant flux of gloomy news from the media from dragging down our positive vibration. I don't know if Eduardo or Leo can speak to that.
I can take a quick bite of it, and Leo, feel free to add there. But that's a great question, Glaucio. And I think there's a couple elements of what we discuss here that I would like to bring back into focus. Right? It's again, it's primarily related to our willpower, right? And related to us really deciding to get control over our thoughts and actions versus being led through, right? So there's a lot of debate about how do you go through life? Are you a zombie, right? Meaning, do you get up in the morning and just mechanically, go and have breakfast, go to work, come back to home, watch TV and go back to bed, and then you repeat that cycle. And these days we cannot even go to work; we have to stay at home for work, and every day almost seems like the same. Are we being led through life, or are we conducting ourselves through life? And this is where being very much aware of how we think is very important, and making decisions to change. The one big normalizer, and that's another blessing that we appreciate from how the providence has created this universe and world, is each one of us has 24 hours. Nobody, no matter how much money you have, you cannot buy an additional hour. No one has 25 hours. And what that means is each hour that you choose to do one thing means you are not doing something else. Okay, you cannot be doing good and bad at the same time. It's impossible. It's physically impossible. You cannot decide to do 24 hours of good and 24 hours of bad things, which means that each minute that you conquer saying, I'm gonna be disciplined enough to dedicate this much time reading. I'm gonna read again. How many of us have found that reading the codification, right? The 5 books, you can read them 100 times, and you always learn something new every time you read the gospel, every time you read the Spirit's book. Some people have some very old books. They are falling apart because they keep reading them and they keep going back and finding more insights. So committing to making that a habit and leaving less and less time to be attracted by bad news, by negative news, will absolutely help you change, how you perceive the world, and will at the same time help you raise your vibrational pattern, because you are feeding so many good things that you're not leaving any room to get distracted or for bad things to happen. We all have 24 hours a day.
Could I add something to that also,
Sure.
by the way? I also find that just having the knowledge of the fact that the news is gloomier, that the tone has been getting gloomier, I think that also helps you, stay cognizant and conscious of the progress that the world is making, and to make you conscious that that gloominess is an illusion. And so while you do, I mean, not totally, because obviously there is still bad news in the world, but it's important to remember that that is a reflection of a negativity bias as well. Because once you understand that, then you think, okay, well, I can't let this determine my mood, because it isn't an accurate reflection. And even though there are bad things, then obviously Eduardo's answer is a great way to deal with the fact that there are actually a lot of there is a lot of real gloominess. But still, we should keep in mind that there's tremendous progress has been made, and that's often overlooked. And so that's another thing that can keep your vibrational patterns up, is remembering, like, the overall trend is a positive one, even in dark times. And it's, and also have faith. I think that's a big one too, because Providence is in control of a lot more than we can ever know. And if we can trust that the general trend is forward and good, then I think having that faith also strengthens your ability to every day to have that positive attitude.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, both Eduardo and Leo. I think we have time for just one last question. So thank you. Drea Amorin says, Kardec states that Spiritism's main goal is to improve oneself. And question specifically, question 919 of the Spirit's book motivates us to know oneself. How could it also be a tool toward happier new thinking?
Yeah, so if I may take a stab here, and Andrea Morin is my sister, so thank you very much, little sis, for watching us. I really appreciate it. Makes me very, very happy. And I love those. There's two questions that I like a lot of questions from Spirit's book, but question 919 and question 909 are two questions that I always refer to. So to Andrea's question, and it goes back to the beginning of our talk here. Do we really know ourselves? Do we really understand the quality of our thoughts? And the answer is we don't. Because first, we don't really have good mechanisms, right? I mean, it's easier. So Leo shared a lot of really great facts, and those would be measured, right? There are metrics. There's a way to collect the data. It's structured. It's discipline. We unfortunately still don't have mechanisms to measure our thoughts. There's no app, there's no device that you plug in that will give you like your credit score, right? You can go to Credit Karma and you can get your credit score. I cannot get my thinking score, right? I wish I could say, hey, I go to this app and it's going to tell me, hey, Eduardo, here's your vibration. So we don't know really who we are. We don't. So this exercise of spending more time until a day where we will be able to actually gauge that, to know oneself, as it was explained to us in question 919, which is one of the great way to understand where you're starting from. That is a daily exercise, right? That is what we should be doing. If I may, introduce question 909 to remind ourselves. That's another great question. It says, are an individual's own efforts enough to vanquish his or her bad tendencies? So Kardec is, again, always very smart, pointed, saying, do we actually have what it takes within ourselves to improve ourselves, or do we depend on somebody else, on something else? And the spirits give us another slap in the face, as they normally do, and pull up the ear, saying, yes, a very small effort is often all that is needed. It's almost an insult, right, to our intelligence. Yes, a very small effort is often all that is needed. It is the will that is missing. It's quite astounding how few of you make any serious effort. Again, that's the spirituality slapping us in the face, saying very few of you actually commit to making small changes. We think we do, but it's so easy for us to go back to our old self. Very hard to make even small changes. So think about that.
Thank you. Thank you. This is great. I wish we had that 25th hour to just squish here and so that we could keep talking, but we have reached the time to come close to say goodbye. I want to say thank you again, Eduardo. Thank you again, Leo. Thank everyone. As a reminder, as I mentioned before, next Saturday, January 16th at 11 a.m., don't miss Anísio Rezende, who will be speaking. Let's talk about the gospel. Eduardo, before we close the live, can you please say a prayer?
Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Marcia. You know, it is truly with our hearts full of joy that I invite everyone who is here with us, watching this conversation, to unite in hearts and in minds, because we also know the power of praying together. The gospel tells us, and we learn that it really multiplies many, many times our ability to reach higher realms, to impact positive change. So let us take this moment, first of all, to unite in sentiment and in thoughts. Let us remember that we are not alone, that we have a extremely devoted soul, a perfect spirit, our Master Jesus, who is working for us and with us 24/7, and is here with us right now because we are working in his gospel, and we are working to spread the word. And he always promised us that where two or more people would be in his name, he himself would be there. Of course, sometimes through his envoys, our mentors, our guides who are here with us. So let our hearts rejoice that we have this blessed opportunity to be working in his gospel, that we are brothers and sisters in the Spiritist movement, trying to learn, trying to improve ourselves, trying to help those who are around us, being beacons of light in this new era of transformation, where we move from a earth of suffering to a planet of regeneration. So blessings to all who are here with us today, a deep sentiment of being thankful and being grateful for this opportunity, and so be it.
So be it. Thank everyone. Thank Eduardo. For everyone, please have a great weekend. Be safe and healthy.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.